Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Joe Davidge. I'm the Executive Director here at the Georgia Center for the Book. And on behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book and DeKalb County Public Library, welcome to another in our continuing series of virtual author events. If you would like to purchase a copy of the book this evening, The Marathon Don't Stop, A Cappella is our bookstore tonight, and they will be able to get you a signed copy if you choose to purchase one from them. And we'll go ahead and put the link in the chat section. Also, if you would like to ask the panelists a question after the official presentation, you can either put the question in the chat or use the Q&A feature that is either at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on your device. I would also like to thank the DeKalb Library Foundation. They are the fundraising arm of our library system who provide funds for so many things outside of the tax base, such as our 1,000 Books Before Kindergarten and our Take the Internet Home program. They're also the organization that pays for all of the Zoom accounts that our library uses and have been using very vigorously since the pandemic began over a year ago. Of course, I'd like to invite you all to ask as many questions as possible. We have a fantastic presentation this evening, a very interesting and timely book, considering that we are coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the death of Nipsey Hussle. Of course, The Marathon Don't Stop is the first in-depth biography of Nipsey Hussle, the hip-hop mogul, artist, and activist whose transformative legacy inspired a generation with his motivational lyrics and visionary business savvy. For Nipsey Hussle, The Marathon was more than a mixtape title or the name of a clothing store. It was a way of life, a metaphor for the relentless pursuit of excellence and the willpower required to overcome adversity day after day. Like so many others in the industry, he was tragically shot. In Nipsey's case, it was in the very neighborhood he was dedicated to building up. Combining an on-the-ground reporting candid style with interviews of Hussle's friends, family, and peers, The Marathon Don't Stop traces the life and work of an extraordinary artist, placing him in historical context and unpacking his complex legacy. For the first time ever, members of his inner circle will speak about the man they knew and his determination to maintain integrity amidst the treacherous extremes of street life and the rap game. Rob Kenner is one of the most prolific and influential voices in hip-hop publishing. A founding editor of Vibe, Kenner joined the startup team of Quincy Jones's groundbreaking hip-hop monthly in 1992. During a 19-year run at Vibe, he edited and wrote cover and feature stories on iconic cultural figures, ranging from Tupac Shakur to Barack Obama, as well as writing the acclaimed column Boom Shots. Kenner's writing has appeared in Complex, Genius, Mass Appeal, Pigeons and Planes, Ego Trip, Poetry Magazine, The New York Times, and Billboard. He has also produced and directed documentary shorts for the likes of De La Soul, Nas, and Post Malone. As an editor at Vibe Books, Kenner worked on the New York Times bestseller Tupac Shakur and contributed to the Vibe History of Hip Hop. He went on to co-author VX, 10 Years of Vibe Photography, and produced the book Unbelievable, a biography of the notorious B.I.G. by Cheo Hodari Choker Jr., which was optioned for the movie picture Notorious. We also welcome Dr. Regina N. Bailey, who is a writer and researcher of African-American life and culture with emphasis on contemporary American South. She is an alumna Nassar Jones Hip Hop Fellow and is the Assistant Professor of English and African Diaspora Studies at Kennesaw State University here in Georgia. Her expertise and research interests include 20th and 21st century African-American literature, hip hop culture, race, and the contemporary US South and sound studies. She is the author of the book Chronicling Stankonia, The Rise of the Hip Hop South, and is also the editor of the forthcoming collection of essays on Outkast and Outcast Reader by University of Georgia Press. Dr. Bradley is the founder and host of Outcasted Conversations. Her scholarship on the popular South and commentaries and fiction have appeared in South, a scholarly journal, Black Camera, Meridians, Journal of Ethnic American Literature, Pamphlet, and Current Musicology, The Washington Post, NPR, News One, Sounding Out, Creative Living Atlanta, and the Oxford American. She will also be joined this evening by Tamiko Hope, who is a native Georgian who got her start in the world of entertainment as a college intern at LaFace Records in Atlanta, Georgia. She went on to work for Usher and Goody Mob before launching her own PR and editorial firm, Word Inc. Hope has been an integral part of the growing success of Southern artists, including spearheading a national PR campaign for Grammy Award-winning artists, producers, and DJs. Her clientele included Outkast, Rocco, Shawty Lo, Nipsey Hussle, Killer Mike, DJ Scream, DJ Princess, Cut, and many others. She also has contributed to publications and websites such as Upscale, Teen People, MTV, All Hip Hop. She is the author of The Genius Things They Did, as well as Indie Insider book series. She has appeared on an episode of Jermaine Dupri's Lifetime reality show, The Rap Game, and recently launched a podcast called This Is Hope. Finally, we welcome Christina Lee, who is a freelance music and culture journalist, whose work has appeared in Billboard, The Guardian, Pitchfork, The Washington Post, and many other publications. She is a regular contributor to NPR's All Songs Considered. Previously, she and Dr. Regina Bradley co-hosted Bottom of the Map, a podcast about hip hop and the contemporary American South, which was featured in Atlanta Magazine, Spotify, and the New York Times. She also wrote and narrated Racket, Inside the Gold Club, an 8-episode podcast series about months-long federal trials surrounding the Atlanta strip club, which Vulture named among the best new true crime podcasts in September of 2020. Welcome to you all. I'm sure this is going to be a fascinating discussion. So let's go ahead and kick it off with Rob.
Thank you very much. And this is indeed going to be a great discussion. We've got a wonderful panel assembled today. When we were looking forward to this conversation and sharing ideas via email, one of the things that made this book, The Marathon Don't Stop, feel so timely is that, as I've been saying in some of the interviews that I've done earlier today, as we roll the book out this week, that Nipsey Hussle was a uniter and not a divider. And, you know, there's been a lot of attention paid to March 31st, which is, you know, the anniversary of a tragedy and an atrocity. I prefer to focus on March 30th, which is the 5th anniversary of a record called FDT, which everybody can Google if they want to spell it out, if you're not familiar. YG and Nipsey Hussle came together from different parts of Los Angeles, from different neighborhoods, different dress codes and affiliations, and they united or worked to unite the streets of LA at a time when presidential candidate Trump was seeking to divide America. And so we've seen the results of that kind of evil rhetoric in Atlanta just recently with the atrocity that took place where innocent lives were lost and blood was shed because of a lost soul, a person filled with hatred who, you know, took up a gun and took away 8 lives. And I think it's important when we talk about gangster rap, which is a term that I explore in the book, and that we really try to understand what gangs are and who these gangster rappers really are. A lot of people had not heard of the Proud Boys before very recently. And, you know, organizations like that are very dangerous gangs that operate with some kind of an air of respectability due to the color of their skin or their political affiliations and their connections. And, you know, some of them, I believe one of the founders of the Proud Boys was also one of the founders of Vice, the multi-million-dollar media corporation. So it's important to remember who the gangs really are, who the gangsters really are. And I think it's important when we talk about Nipsey Hussle, Ermias Ascadone, that we remember that he was a uniter and not a divider. And, you know, I've been comparing him to a figure like Bob Marley, who is known for a song, One Love. Now, Nip's music is very different than Bob Marley's, but the spirit of bringing people together from different backgrounds was very much a part of his MO and his mindset. So I just wanted to set that out off top. out of respect to the lives lost in Atlanta, all the Asian people in America that are feeling a little less safe today because of the foolishness that goes on. I just want to show a little bit of, respect for what has actually taken place. I mean, we're speaking today freely. We're expressing ourselves through freedom of speech in America. Just a few months after a hostile coup attempt to overthrow the government was narrowly avoided. Mm-hmm. And if we don't confront the fact that there's a lot of people out there that still agree with those ideas, we're doing ourselves a disservice. We need to understand that Nipsey Hussle is one of the voices that was speaking clearly about the threat that existed. And, so when people say, well, he's a gangster rapper, I think they're missing the point. So that's why I wrote this book, The Marathon Don't Stop. I believe that, it was necessary to place Nipsey Hussle within the proper context in American history, LA history, and hip hop history, because I believe that he is actually a singular figure in the evolution of hip hop, which has become, the most popular form of entertainment on the planet. And, there was a time when hip hop was considered a fad and considered not really music and all these other things, but we see where it's gone. When Vibe magazine was getting started, when Quincy Jones was putting this plan together and gathering his team, there were people within Time Inc. that thought hip hop fans don't read. Why are you doing a magazine? Well, we've done several books. There are hip hop journalists, hip hop professors. One of the participants in our conversation today, I was pleased to see Dr. Regina Bradley, is it Nasir Jones Scholar? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Yeah. So Nasir Jones, my former boss at Mass Appeal. I remember when I got the Illmatic advanced cassette on my desk at Vibe, and his work is now studied alongside great poets of all time. So it's important to understand when you talk about gangster rap and things of these kind of broad brush surface judgments, that we need to show proper respect for these poets and visionaries and people that have defied the odds, overcome tremendous obstacles, and we're still going to be talking about them for a long time, God willing. So that's why I wrote the book, The Marathon Don't Stop: The Life and Times of Nipsey Hussle. We want to talk about a whole lot of stuff. There's a lot of people on this panel. I'm not going to get too deep right off top, but I just wanted to frame my thoughts that way. And maybe we should just keep it moving. What do you think?
Do it.
Okay.
Well, Rob, thank you so much for that amazing intro and that amazing, I guess, perspective going into this book. It's interesting because, as you say with Vibe Books, like you had previously worked on books by featuring Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac, like top 10 rapper list material. I guess at one point, did you realize that not only was Nipsey Hussle worthy of a book, but that he needed to be presented in the proper context, as you say?
When did I know?
Yeah.
Well, I knew he was special the first time I met him, which was in the offices of Vibe magazine in 2009. He came up to the office to present his mixtape Bullets Ain't Got No Name Volume 2. And this was very early in his journey as a mixtape rapper. And he came up to the office just shining. Like he just had a glow about him, charisma, personal magnetism, focus, crackling mind. You could just feel his energy. And he played, the record that I remember him playing was a cut called Dre Jackin' for Beats which was him flowing over gin and juice, which is not a beat to be played with. You have to know what you're doing on that track or you will sound foolish. And, you know, he established early on that he was from Rolling 60s and proudly mentioned Crenshaw and Slauson. And, you know, he proceeded to press play. And it was a remarkable thing. You know, we put out the first cover on Snoop, you know, when the you know, Chronic was ringing out and Snoop's solo debut was just coming. And Kevin Powell wrote that cover story, which I edited. And, you know, so I had a strong feeling of deja vu listening to this cut. And I also, you know, was listening to it at a time when it was teach me how to Dougie and do the stanky leg time, you know, at that moment in hip hop. So it was refreshing to me to hear some hard LA rap. And so after that meeting, I took him aside and I said, you know, keep doing what you're doing. You know, we're going to look out. We're going to try and show you all the strength that we can. And, you know, anyway, I found out later while working on the book that he had a strong desire to be in Vibe. And he had been on this campaign for a while. He had been sending demos and headshots to the next section, which was our section for new artists. Mary J. Blige got her first look. Outkast, actually, shout out to, you know, Dungeon Fam. They got a look in the next section. So that's what Nipsey wanted. And I learned later that he was a little salty that we were not getting back to him. Although at the time he wasn't signed, he was sending, you know, probably like burned CDs with magic marker, you know, on the thing. But he had a vision and he wasn't going to be deterred. And like all the other goals that he set for himself, I learned that, you know, he just overcame the obstacles until he got himself up in Vibe. And, you know, he got his page in the magazine shortly before Vibe ceased print publication. And, you know, our digital strategy, frankly, was not as strong as his digital strategy. So, you know, he continued to rise while Vibe had to regroup and rebuild and still going strong. But you know, so I knew that he was special, but I think the whole industry got the memo around the Crenshaw mixtape. If everybody remembers that he sold physical copies of a tape that was going to be available for free on DatPiff, $100 a piece, you know, limited edition and bundled with tickets to a VIP live music experience that would be held in the future for his hardcore supporters. Now, of course, that has become a standard practice in the music industry. Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift sell bundles of their albums now with tickets to the tour and, you know, a CD, but that's Nipsey's idea. He innovated that, and it has become a blueprint that is imitated throughout the music industry today. You know, his takeoff as an artist coincided with the implosion of the record industry. This was post Napster. This was when you could not sell CDs. So, you know, we talk about, you mentioned like top 10 rappers like Tupac and Biggie. They were thriving when the record industry was a money machine. You know, Hype Williams shoots your video, multi-million-dollar budgets. Everything is just bells and whistles. And, you know, it wasn't easy, but it was a different game. So Nip had to reinvent the whole thing. He used the metaphor in one of his interviews that, you know, it was like we're, you know, fixing the plane during takeoff. Like the plane is taking off and we got to go repair the engines and change up from, you know, jet propulsion to, I don't know what, a glider or something. So basically the world saw Jay-Z tapped in at that moment. He wired $10,000 for 100 CDs, and they sold $100,000 worth of CDs at first pop-up shop. So Nip was special, but it was really after my conversation with him during the rollout of Victory Lap when he came to, you know, an early morning meetings, the earliest any rapper has ever booked an appointment with me in all my years as a journalist. He was there for a 9:30 appointment a.m. and showed up early, by the way, had his green tea, and we sat down and chopped it. And, you know, we were producing a 5-minute video for YouTube, and it was very clear to me that this was way bigger than a 5-minute YouTube video. Just conversation was so profound. And really for me, all of us, you know, as journalists, we have some interviews that are special, you know, while it's happening. But this was like more of a life-changing conversation, you know, because he's a person that thinks differently about the creative world and, you know, being a creator and understanding that the system is built to exploit you. You know, the people who made the rules were not artists, were not writers, were not filmmakers. They were money people and lawyers and, you know, accountants, or just, you know, people who want to extract maximum value for minimum input. And so Nip was very clear about that, and he had devised certain strategies to keep all money in and no money out. And that's a very profound concept. And so I thought about my life differently during this conversation. I walked out of that room enlightened, and I realized at that point I had to do something else with this interview than what was planned, you know? So that was the beginning of this book. And yeah, here we are today.
I just wanted to also point out, when you were talking about, you know, Nip being considered a gangster rapper because he was affiliated with the gang. And I was introduced to Nip's, actually his interview with Davey D by my brother, like maybe around 2012, 2013. So it wasn't even his music. Like, my brother has always turned me on to like what was new and next in hip hop. But with Nip, it wasn't even the music, it was his mindset. And what was interesting to me about it was that I didn't know much about LA culture. And it's almost like a lot of people judge what they don't know. And once I started diving a little deeper into, you know, what LA was about, you know, specifically, you know, South Central, and how you may not even be gang affiliated, but because of the neighborhood you're in, the block you're on, you're automatically sometimes just a part of it. I know Kendrick has talked about that before. And so I just kind of wanted to put that out there, give a little context that a lot of times people feel like they have a choice sometimes. And a lot of times it's not necessarily a choice. It's just because of that culture and where you're located and where you're raised. And Nipsey talked about that a lot in his music, you know, about what block you're on and you know, and where your grandmother's address is or where your mom's address is, you know, what you're affiliated with. So I think a lot of times people feel like, oh, well, he's a gangbanger by choice. And I'm not saying that people don't have choices, but I am saying that I think if you don't understand that culture, you won't understand, it's easy to judge what you don't understand, is what I'm trying to say. So I just wanted to point that out, and you know, in regards to context to gang culture in LA.
100%.
Can we talk about how, like, it's okay? So I love this book. Like, I feel like there's a lot that I learned about it. And kind of like what Tamiko was talking about, my little brother put me on the Nip. Like, he is a diehard. You know, he's like, no, you have to understand. And as somebody who was coming out of writing a dissertation, I didn't know what the hell to listen to, who to listen to. It was like I was in a particular, you know, time frame that was focused on my work. So I was like, oh, okay. But it was just the interviews that really caught my attention, and just how he had, you know, I'm sorry to say it, but he had no fucks in his garden. His garden was dusty, and he was like, try me and try it, you know what I'm saying? Which made me be like, okay, let me give this guy a serious listen. But one of the things I thought about as I was going through the book is, it was kind of like what you were pointing out, Rob, and I'm hoping that you can expand on this, right? Is that folks hear the term gangster rap and automatically go back to the late 1980s and 1990s. There's no room to evolve. And I'm wondering, as an academic, if part of that is because we need to figure out new language, you know what I'm saying? So I'm just kind of curious, you know, what was your intention on trying to kind of show the evolution of what gang life looked like? Because you pull from a little bit of everybody. You pull from the archives, you pull from interviews with academics who were talking about gang life and gang culture. And ultimately that added a layer of of complexity and nuance to this conversation that, oh, all gangs are bad, period. And as somebody from, you know, Southwest Georgia, I mean, the way that folks, you know, banged up in the Benny is a little different than out in LA. But I'm just curious, you know, could you talk a little bit about why that's important? Because I feel like this book updates the narrative around what we understand gangster rap, where it has gone, not necessarily where it's been.
I definitely appreciate that you picked up on that, because I myself was wrestling with the basic, you know, the way I was programmed as a, you know, person who grew up with American media and, you know, loving hip hop, but, you know, watching the news on TV and just, you know, we're programmed to a certain narrative. Mm-hmm. So I had to educate myself. And, you know, as Tamiko mentioned, it is partly to do with the neighborhood that you're in, and, you know, but it's also to do with the history of those neighborhoods, right? So I had to go all the way back to like before California was part of the United States and understand like whose land are we talking about and how did that land get divided up? And because it's ultimately, you know, it's about turf, right? It's about blocks, it's about ownership, you know, and Nip and Sam, you know, did everything in that plaza, you know, that shopping plaza was everything to them. And they eventually became owners of it. And, you know, then of course, Nip lost his life there. And so I had to really struggle with why he felt so committed to that place as such a highly intelligent, such a highly visionary person. What was the reason that he was so committed to that block and that community? And, you know, it led me on a journey to understand that, you know, I mentioned the Proud Boys in my opening remarks because they are the latest incarnation, but, you know, there was a gang called the Spook Hunters in LA. Yeah. And they had a jacket with a caricature of a lynching as like their logo. And, you know, when Black kids were going to school, they did not want to run into the Spook Hunters. You know, that's not a good thing to happen. Or if a family was maybe moved, you know, the whole concept, we hear the term South Central Los Angeles, right? Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? It is the area where Black families were forced to reside, you know, and it was a community, it was wonderful, you know, there was a rich cultural life, right? But if you wanted to move somewhere else, there were laws. There was a thing called redlining, mm-hmm. which prevented Black families from owning property outside of, you know, Central Ave, south of, you know, this block. And, you know, there's videos where Nip is going around his neighborhood explaining this stuff. Like he was very aware of all that. He was fully up on redlining and what South Central meant and everything else. So, you know, he was completely, you know, cognizant of all the risks of being involved in the gangs. And he made a decision to go ahead and do what he did. And so I wanted to understand that better. I wanted to fully, you know, immerse myself in what the factors might have been to, you know, make him, you know, decide the things that he did. And, you know, I've done my best to lay that out in the book. But, you know, so the Spook Hunters necessitated neighborhood organizations to protect the areas that were under siege by white gangs. You know, and so you had groups like the Slawsons. Now, the Slawsons were the group that Nip most strongly identified with because of the street Slawsons. And also, if you start to learn about someone named Bunchy Carter, you start to understand that, okay, the Slawsons were a neighborhood organization. They protected the neighborhood. They got into, you know, things that were not all, you know, protect and serve. There was, you know, they were enjoying life. They were doing what they did, but, you know, they were there for the community. And when Bunchy Carter, who was head of the Slawsons, was in prison with some of the leaders of the Panthers, they said, you know, we need you to open the LA branch of the Panthers. Mm-hmm. And that was how that happened. So it comes about now that the FBI identifies the Black Panthers as the #1 threat to American security. You know, we all saw, I think most of us probably saw the film that just came out, Judas and the Black Messiah, about Fred Hampton. You know, similar kind of situation played out in LA with Bunchy Carter and COINTELPRO and things of this nature. So, you know, when Nip identified himself with the Slauson Boys, when he started a group of his homies, you know, he had a business vision for his music, that he was not just going to be the signed artist. He understood the game, that he had to have artists under him from the beginning. His earliest interviews, you know, he's going to start his Slauson Boys records. He's going to have his guys that are going to be, you know, signed to that, and he's going to build his business. But he was also, you know, bringing that name, the Slausons, back up. Mm-hmm. And I believe that part of the work that he was doing, you know, everybody knows that he linked with YG. He also had Killa Twan, you know, who was not from his neighborhood, you know, wore red instead of blue. And, you know, he was very deliberately bringing people together and building a coalition, because I believe his ultimate goal was to redirect. You know, there's a film called Bastards of the Party, which everybody should watch, which is a similar kind of situation where someone who's from the life is trying to understand, what is this really about? You know, I've lost a lot of loved ones to the streets, and, you know, we're living and dying for these blocks. There must be more to it, you know, and you know, in his curiosity, he went deep, and that was an important resource for my book, actually, that film. And you know, what he came to understand is that, you know, it was the wreckage of the Black Panthers. It was the you know, the government really targeted the Black Panthers and did a number on the, you know, the people were killed, people were locked up. And out of the ashes of the Black Panthers rose, you know, the Crips, the Bloods. You know, they tried their best to emulate the blueprint. There was a, you know, a mission statement and things, but it became fractured, and it became, you know, there's this narrative that it repeats of, you know, attempts to uplift and unify that get short-circuited or, you know, turned against itself. And I think that's what happened. I think Nip understood that. I think he was determined to try to redirect and bring a higher understanding to these organizations. It wasn't as simple as gang prevention.
Right.
You know, it wasn't as simple as, you know, say no to drugs. You know what I mean? There was a larger effort, needed a higher vision. And what he was doing was that. I think that was his mission. And, you know, so this is my attempt to put some of that context in place.
Yeah, I think, because the other thing that stood out, you know, he said that he was this generation's Tupac Shakur, which it wasn't even like bars that I thought about. It was, you know, community commitments and contributions to community. And also, you know, Afeni Shakur and Mutulu Shakur, you know, he was literally a cub of the Black Panther Party. Like his parents were, you know, Shakur's parents were involved, you know what I'm saying? And then I'm thinking even about Nip's own background. Like his dad was a Eritrean nationalist, and his grandma, even, you know, she had her own little nationalism thing going on. So I think the other thing I most appreciate about this is it wasn't like a flat, okay, Nip was this generation's Tupac Shakur. You kind of like just let it stand there. It's like, no, here are the receipts. Like here are the receipts. Let me show you exactly what I'm talking about. But I didn't like, when reading this book, I didn't realize how much of a connection he had to Atlanta.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. I mean, like, I thought it was really dope that Afeni Shakur invited him out to come in when he was concept.
I wish there was a video of that set. I still have hope in my heart that this book is going to go out there and somebody's going to say, yeah, I was the video guy at that release party, and here's Concept's set, because people don't even know that that's the same guy. People, you know, that record was released. People don't know. I mean, I have a copy. I haven't put it out because I'm holding it close. It was given to me in confidence, but
right.
He's amazing on that record, you know, and I want to see him with the special ed you know, flat top and the whole thing, man.
Can you share a little bit about, journalists can never tell their sources. Working with Chris has told me that, but I'm just curious though, because I'm like, when I teach about the Black Power and the Black arts movement in my African American lit class, for example, Nipsey Hussle's always in conversation with the 10-point Black Panther program. Like it's important to kind of show students this didn't just happen in a vacuum. So I guess that's like, I'm thinking about craft. Like, how did you make sure that this book didn't just happen in a vacuum? Because usually, we're still grieving, so to speak, right? So usually when we think about folks who have been murdered, or we're like, oh, okay, we focus on the murder aspect of it. How did you make sure that as you were telling his story, it didn't get sucked into that vacuum of, a tragic, gone too soon, on the cusp? How did you make sure that you didn't fall into those same kind of things that a lot of writers often fall into?
That was something I never even had to think twice about. I knew that I didn't want to write a book about his passing. I didn't want to write a book about death. I decided that I had to do this work based on the way his mind sparked my mind. And honestly, the fact of his passing, I tried to make it as least, significant part of the book as possible, because obviously, a lot of people were sleeping on him until, oh, wow, there's this memorial at the Staples Center, and Barack Obama wrote a letter, and, Stevie Wonder was there to sing. And so there was a lot of, attention, and 2000% spike in streams. All that stuff is important to note, and, the details of the murder and all that. But I just wasn't going to make that the focus of the book, because it's just not, there's so much more interesting and important stuff to talk about. And so, yeah, that was never even a thought. But yeah, I mean, the Atlanta connection is fascinating to me for a lot of reasons. But yeah, the fact that, Afeni Shakur heard that record, had no idea who this young man was. And it wasn't just him on the record, but still, he flies out of LA to Atlanta before he's involved in the street life, really, before anything, and is performing at the Tupac launch event. And, it's crazy. That's like destiny calling you. It's remarkable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to say he recorded Mailbox Money, recorded a lot of it in Atlanta at DJ Drama Studio at Mean Street. So yeah, he has a lot of Atlanta connections for sure. And hopefully I'm not switching subjects, but you had mentioned in the book also his trip to Eritrea. And I know that when he said on his first trip, when he went, it was really life transforming for him. It was where he learned the importance of family and being, present at mealtime. I think when the first trip was when I think first started getting involved in, the gang culture. So to be removed from that and to be where he was from and know his roots. Can you talk a little bit about what you think that transformation was for him when he went to his dad's homeland?
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously a transformative event in his life. He talked about it when he and I spoke, and in other interviews as well. And that's really a testament. I think it's important to note that he knew the importance of family before he went to Eritrea, because, his family was always important to him. Not every family is as solid in, America as that family. And even though his mom and dad were not together, his dad was a presence in his life. And that whole trip to Eritrea was about visiting that side of his family, so his mother and father and brother and sister are a huge influence and impact. And Granny, of course, can't leave out Granny, they shaped him profoundly. But yes, the trip to Eritrea absolutely was a turning point in his life, changed everything for him. He said, he talked about being in a country where the government and everyone is, you know, looked like him, you know, just that alone. And, you know, he was already very much on his music mission by that point. So he took some of his music to play out there. And if you've seen the videos of him and Sam in Eritrea, I don't know if y'all have caught that on YouTube, but he's straight off the block. He's got the giant oversized white tee. He's got the White Sox cap and the super baggy clothes. And it's just, it's cool to see him, like even on the plane going over, you can kind of sense some of his reluctance because, you know, he admitted that at the time, the idea of spending 3 months away from all the stuff he had going on in LA at that moment was not the most appealing thought to him. Like he wanted to visit his granny and, you know, his relatives and get in touch with his Eritrean heritage, but maybe 2 weeks would be enough, you know, but his father insisted, no, we're going to really see the country. We're going to spend time. We're going all the way to East Africa. So we're going for 3 months. And, you know, on the plane over, you know, he's got his headphones on and his dad is like trying to say, so are you excited to be going? And he's like, yeah, I'm cool. You know, like it was funny seeing his demeanor. But later you see him like playing ball with local kids and, you know, teaching them like, I guess, stickball or baseball or something like that. And, you know, it's just seeing him getting involved. And apparently he would go to a local record store near where he was staying. And he would tell them, you know, I'm going to be a famous rapper one day. You're going to know my name. And of course, that was another goal that he set, which he accomplished. And as you know, later in the book, he returned to Eritrea after the release of Victory Lap and before the tour really kicked off in earnest. And it was a shorter trip and more VIP status. And he met with the president of the country and all of this stuff. And, you know, he gave an amazing interview with the newspaper there where he kind of just told his life story. And he was a wonderful interview subject. I mean, you know, he gave I don't think he must never have turned down an interview request. You know, like there's hundreds of video interviews of Nipsey Hussle all over YouTube. Although there are almost no decent magazine profiles of him, he controlled the narrative. He spoke his truth into the camera. He knew that he could directly connect with his fans. And so, you know, there's interviews that he gave telling similar anecdotes, but he would always add like one detail, a new detail. Everyone is worth listening to. Everyone, there's some new gem. And when he recapped his entire life and career, and, you know, and this reporter is not like the most hip hop savvy person. She works for the Eritrean National News Agency, but she's asking these questions like, so are gangs scary? And, you know, it's an amazing conversation. And he really patiently answers every question and lays it all out. And it's there as a document, you know, of him speaking to, you know, the nation. And I think he came to think of Eritrea as home, although he only visited twice. I believe he probably would have spent more time there, you know, if his life had unfolded the way he hoped it would, you know. And it's really worth going and checking out that interview just to hear him talk about his journey to an audience. And the other thing, which was very cool, so obviously in Eritrea, Nipsey Hussle is not a reference that people get, right? Mm-hmm. So Nipsey Hussle doesn't mean that much. And so what does Nipsey mean? But the local slang, the word Nebsy is a word similar to like homeboy or, you know, something of that nature. It's like a familiar term of affection for someone that you identify with. And so that became his name in Eritrea, is Nebsy. And all the people in his father's homeland know him as that. And the reporter asked, you know, are you cool with that? Do you want to correct anything about that? And he said, no, that's a great name. You know, I'm happy with that, to be known as Nebsy, you know.
Something that I just want to point to real quick is that while we're talking about the full extent of the research that you had to do, per my count, I did it on Post-it notes today.
Yeah.
I think this book features like over 30 original interviews. And the thing is, like, most of these are taking place in like 2019 and 2020. So, and these are folks that are family, childhood friends, fellow Rolling 60 members, future business partners, stakeholders. So I guess I'm just wondering, first, what was it like to track all these people down? I don't know if this was before or during the pandemic, but then also, of course, what are their stories adding to our perspective of Nipsey Hussle? Like, I just want you to speak on that, because that is a lot of reporting, sir.
Well, I couldn't do this in a half-baked way. The burden of responsibility was heavy on my shoulders. I'll be honest with you. I felt that if I'm going to take this on, it has to be something that can stand the test of time. I don't expect this will be the only book ever written about Nipsey Hussle, but as I mentioned before, there are very few decent magazine profiles of him. Any other major figure would have had at least that to work with. And apart from the YouTube interviews and of course the beautiful GQ profile of him and Lauren, few and far between, in terms of just the most basic information. So I realized that, a lot of groundwork had to be done. And that was my responsibility as an author to take that on. So speaking with people like Cuzzy Capone, people like Jay Stone, Killa Twan, Pac-Man, that, BH, that's such a privilege, and to be able to have each of those young men make a decision to trust me and tell their story, each of those conversations was revelatory. And, I thank them in the acknowledgments to the book. People like Rallo, and then there were people who came out after the book was announced, like there were people I knew I wanted to speak with, some I have yet to speak with. And in those cases, I made use of all the information that was available. But, once the book was announced that it was coming, which there was a long lead up before that took place, like I've been working on this book, as I mentioned, for, better part of 3 years, really gelled after that victory lap conversation. But, Dexter Brown came out of nowhere, hit me up on Facebook Messenger from Trinidad, and here's a gigantic missing piece to the puzzle, someone whose name is barely known. He's in the thank yous to the Crenshaw tape, and he got shouted out on maybe 1 or 2 interviews, but I would hazard a guess that if Dexter Brown had not taken Nipsey in at the time that he did, I'm not sure we would be talking about him today. I'm not sure what would have happened, but he got the name Nipsey Hussle while basically living in Dexter's. He had, for the first time, unlimited access to recording equipment. And he was also educated on media and principles of ownership. And, Dexter is a photographer from Trinidad, swimming coach at Howard University, graduate of Howard University, civil engineer, brilliant, rebellious spirit, who his wife happened to be one of the head art directors for Rap-A-Lot Records. So he had this, interesting collision of like art and hip hop and, visual arts and being an entrepreneur, running his own photography business, a Black photographer in LA, connecting through like Black Hollywood, models and comedians and celebrities of all stripes would be coming to do photo shoots at Dexter's house. He had no idea that he and his wife had bought a home in the heart of the 60s. He had no clue. And he was out cooking some curry chicken on the, in front of his house one day, and Cuzzy came up, to get a plate of food and just chop it. And he suddenly, it dawned on Dexter, like, you're in the heart of, like he, as a photographer, he's like, you think you could like, introduce me to like some real gang members, like take some cool photos. And Cuzzy's like, I got news for you, bro. you're in the heart of it right now. And, you know, Cuzzy became one of the regulars at Dexter's, you know, although he already lived on the block by his aunt, but, you know, young Arius Ascadome, not yet known as Nipsey Hussle, was just in that transition point where he was no longer going to high school. Whether he quit or was kicked out is not clear, but I'm pretty sure he was asked to leave due to this thing with the computer parts going missing at the school. And, you know, because he built his own computer. It's a brilliant, brilliant mind. And so he found a haven from the street life. You know, he was supporting himself. He was living by grannies. You know, his mom and stepfather had asked him not to stay at home anymore if he wasn't going to be going to school. And so he was at granny's and trying to survive and make his own living and fulfill his lifelong dream of becoming a rapper. And at Dexter's, he found a place where he could pursue all of those things, and just a cool, creative environment, collaborative. Rallo came in, you know, Gooch, who's the one that named Nip, you know, gave him the name Nipsey Hussle, you know, Cuzzy, and a lot of other characters would float and through there. And, you know, that was a part of his story that nobody's ever told. And so I'm very happy that Dexter trusted me with his truth. And, you know, he said he checked me out before he hit me up, and he decided that I would be trustworthy. And, you know, there's another thing too, like everybody, now that Nip is a worldwide icon, superstar, you know, people that weren't necessarily in a rush to, you know, tell his story and present him properly, everybody now wants to control the narrative, right? Everybody now wants to like attach themselves to it or say, I was the one that, you know, it's like that old thing. Every DJ's like, I broke that record, you know, I was the first one to bust that tune big, you know? And so that goes on with any story. And, you know, I think it was important for this to be a journalistic account of Nip's life. And, you know, that's why it was important for me to hear from people that hadn't spoken, that had no music industry agenda, no vested interest other than telling the truth and maybe love for this young man, you know, and just wanting people to know their experiences. And I wanted to hear Tamiko's experiences working with Nip in Atlanta, because I understand you were at a birthday party that he held in ATL one time. Is that true?
Well, I was actually, I met him for the first time in 2014. He and I had a mutual friend. And when I found out he was going to be in Atlanta, I reached out to this mutual friend. And as a publicist, again, knowing his story, when I was introduced through my brother to his interviews and then later to his music, he was the perfect client for me because he was so intelligent. I just felt like he would be a great client. And so I reached out to a mutual friend, knowing how I felt like Nip's mind would work. I felt like he definitely wanted to grow his fan base in, you know, the South and Atlanta. And so I asked him if he would be interested in me doing a media run while he was in Atlanta. And within like maybe 10 minutes, my contact said he wants to do it. And so we set it up at Mean Street, and like maybe 3 days later, I was in this, you know, studio with him, you know, setting up these interviews. And so that was the first time I met him. And then the birthday party you're speaking of, one of my clients is music producer Zaytoven, and he and Zaytoven were part of a collaborative project through Dutch Masters. And they were selected to basically pick an artist. It was two teams. It was Organized Noise, Rick Ross, and then it was Nipsey Hussle and Zaytoven. And they each had to basically mentor an artist that each team chose. And so we went to LA to record, you know, the like commercial drops for this program. And it happened to be on August 15th of 2018, which of course was his last birthday. And so that was, I mean, obviously a special moment. I'll, you know, never forget. And so, yeah, and just to talk about a little bit about his character, a couple of things that I'll never forget was I love the way he always looked you in the eye. He always, when you were saying, when you were talking about your interview experiences with him, he always gave more information than you really asked for. Like, he was very thorough. And the one thing I liked about him, as many interviews as I've heard him do, he always knew how to answer the question differently, or like you said, add something that maybe he never said before. He was very personable, just an all around, great person. And so very, very missed. And I'm glad that you do not focus on his passing in the book. I think that's great, because obviously the book is called, with the title of the book, it really does continue, versus, the marathon don't stop. It's literally continuing. So yeah.
Can I ask you a question, a follow-up? Because the best questions are the follow-up questions.
Sure.
So you said you set up a press run for him 10 minutes after you proposed it. He said yes. You set it up. Who came? Who gave a shit about Nip at that moment? Like, what kind of support did he get in the A? In what year is this? 14?
Like 2014, because he was recording Mailbox Money. I will say this, when he confirmed that he would do it, his next question was, ask her what media outlet she's thinking about. And he wanted to see a list first. And then he chose from the list. Basically approved everybody, but it was like, all hip hop. I know was one, Rolling Out was another, Atlanta media outlet. It was a few more, I think Hip Hop Wired. But yeah, but I will say that, kind of like you said, I don't know about media support, but I went to his Victory Lap concert that he had in Atlanta. He had 2 sold out shows. He was only doing 1 show, and then he added another one. And I went to the first show, and he had a lot of fan support, I'll say that. Maybe not media support, but he had a lot of fans. And I think it also is a testament of how he moved as an independent artist. He was very well connected to his fans, even with that Proud to Pay campaign, which you mentioned in the book as well, where he was so connected to, he wanted to connect more to his fans. He cared more about that than the metrics of what the industry deemed as successful.
100%.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Rob, can I ask you a quick question before I guess we open it up? One of the things that, this is probably the thing that most stood out to me, as a woman who studies hip hop, I was most fascinated by the women in his life and what they said about Nip. Can you talk a little bit about, how you structured that to kind of let their own story shine without taking away from why Nip was such an extraordinary person?
Well, it's no secret that, Lauren London is, carrying the checkered flag proudly and representing the whole marathon movement. And, they had just a very strong connection, as everybody knows. And, her remarks at the memorial service is how the book opens, because there was no other place to begin, even though I didn't want to focus on the tragedy, it was just very important to kind of establish how profound their bond is. And, because she is carrying things on, and then of course, the book also deals with Tanisha, who is Imani's mom. And, he had a lot of respect for women. He talked frankly about how his trip to Eritrea made him realize that America, and specifically, his experience of, how he related to women was not super respectful. And he kind of, self-corrected on that point. And there's a television show that's I had not ever heard of it before, but I guess it's like a cult classic. It's like one of the most critically acclaimed but lowest rated shows, called Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, I think it is. Anyway, he did a cameo appearance in the show. If you've ever seen it, if you've not seen it, pull it up on YouTube. he's basically performs as himself. And this was shortly after he turned down the chance to portray Snoop Dogg in the Death Row movie, or the NWA movie. Yeah. So he turned that role down, but then he did this cameo in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and he pops up. If you've never seen the show, it's like a musical, weird comedy show about a woman who's, you know, getting ready to go out in this scene. And it's about like all the regimen of getting ready that you have to do, of like, you know, waxing strips and plucking and, you know, Spanx and whatever process of getting ready to go to the club that are out on the town that this young woman has gone through. And Nip pops up rapping sort of like a cliche, you know, objectifying women rap, you know, and in the middle of his rap, he notices all the stuff that this woman is going through to get ready to go. And he's like, oh my God, is that really what you have to do? Like, you know, I have to go apologize to some bitches now. And it was just, it was such a highly evolved sense of humor. And it was clear like he was making fun of maybe himself in an earlier period of his life, and understanding that, you know, he might have been perhaps part of the problem at one point in his creative journey, but he was now awake to his missteps. And, you know, from what I understand, you know, Lauren came with him to the shoot that day and was very entertained by the skit, and she made friends with the producers and writers of the show. And, you know, it's just like just a page from the life, you know, but I think it speaks to his self-awareness. And, you know, of course, he was also raising a daughter, and, you know, Imani was, you know, his firstborn child, and someone that he was extremely close with, who, you know, joined him on stage at the Victory Lap launch event, you know, rapping with him and YG, you know, and you can see him as the protective dad in that footage if you go back and watch. I think it's on Tidal. You can check it out there. But he was also letting her get her bars in and, you know, do her thing. And I think that, you know, that is a very cool part of the story, just how he made an effort to keep his daughter involved in the things that he was doing. He wasn't trying to like let his work separate him from her. And, you know, there's a part where he talks about, he used to watch Bob Marley videos, and in a Bob Marley interview video, you would always see kids running around in the background. And he said, you know, I realized that I'm in the studio a lot, and if I don't let her come to the studio, she's just never gonna see me. And I need her to see, even if she has to like be in a room with her iPad watching cartoons or with a babysitter, that I'm here working. I'm not just avoiding you. And, you know, so that was like a cool thing. I thought that he made the effort to make sure that his daughter could be around. And
yeah, he said he was like a sniper. I think he was like, I had to be adamant and pick and choose, you know, what I missed and sacrifice for my kids. I just thought that line stood out to me in the book.
Yeah, for sure. And recently, actually, this did not make the book because I only learned it very recently, but on the anniversary of Victory Lap, Lauren London put up a social media post where I knew that that was her voice on the record Victory Lap saying Victory Lap, you know, in between tracks. But she said that she actually had their son cross like on her hip while she was in the vocal booth doing those ad libs. So, you know, family was definitely a big part of his thing, and, you know, respect for women. You can't have family without a woman in the combo. So
yeah.
Well, everyone, why don't we go ahead and open it up to questions? And I just want to remind folks to either go ahead and put them in the chat or use the Q&A feature, because we'll be pulling for both. And we actually have a couple questions ready to go. So thank you all for those already. A comment from Kevin, who just wanted to say that he thought that Nipsey was ahead of his time and really studied the game. And we have one from Sasha, who asks, do you have any thoughts on Nipsey's admiration or ties with Dr. Sebi?
Yeah. Anybody else want to jump on the Dr. Sebi thing?
Nope.
So everybody has heard the album Victory Lap. There's a song on there called Blue Laces 2. It's one of my favorite songs on the whole track, on the whole project. I've listened to that song on repeat while writing, you know, for hours and hours. Puts me in a zone. One of the tricks of writing something very long is that it helps to like trick yourself to not be aware of how many hours you're actually sitting in front of that computer.
Right.
Yes.
And
Yes, Jesus.
playing something on repeat is very helpful in that regard, until the sun comes up and the garbage truck comes up the block and you realize, oh, wow, I've been at this for a while. Anyway, so Dr. Sebi is mentioned in the record Blue Laces 2. He says they killed Dr. Sebi because he's teaching health. So I think it was Lauren who made him aware of Dr. Sebi's, you know, philosophy of nutrition and herbal remedies and, you know, stimulating the body's natural immune system to fight disease. And Nip found that it was helpful for him. Just, you know, he was not always eating the healthiest, and he found that he responded well to using the diet that Sebi recommended. And you can look it up, the things that he was saying, avoiding dairy and certain foods that he believed were better for Black men, and, you know, certain herbal, you know, extracts and different supplements that he recommended, sea moss and things that are often consumed in Caribbean diets and, you know, African diets. So that was something that Nip found personally useful. And then he did his research like he did with everything. And he started to learn about some really wild stories from Sebi's career where, you know, he was, he came up on charges for like impersonating a doctor or something like that, because he was basically, he was not a medical doctor. He was just self-taught herbalist and nutritionist. But he believed that he could cure cancer and AIDS with his therapies. And he was actually in court on charges and managed to beat the case, which I think captured Nip's imagination. And he wanted to make a film about this, a documentary that would, you know, highlight the fact that, you know, maybe the pharmaceutical companies don't have all the answers, and maybe, you know, these natural remedies and herbs and things would be a better option. And of course, there's a lot of money in pharmaceuticals, as we know. And there were, you know, theories going around that Dr. Sebi's death might have had something to do with, you know, fucking up the money of the pharmaceutical companies, and that they had somehow seen him as a threat. And that was why he, you know, was targeted. And so Nip would joke on a couple of interviews, like, you know, I'm going to make this movie about him. And, you know, if anything happens to me, y'all better ride for me. And that anecdote has become one of the narratives of people seeking to explain what happened on March 31st. I don't particularly believe that theory. I can't disprove it. I haven't actually tried to solve Nip's murder. It's not something that is at the top of my to-do list, but I think that, you know, the Dr. Sebi theory ties in with all of these unexplainable, you know, thoughts that people have around Nip's death and COINTELPRO, and, you know, just unseen forces that conspire to take out promising leaders who are trying to make a change in people's lives, whether it's, you know, in terms of like the street life, or, you know, health or wealth, understanding the rap game, understanding how not to get taken advantage in real estate, and all the ways that Nip was making progress. So this was one of those areas. And you know, Dr. Sebi's own family do not think that he was targeted for his, you know, his work. And, you know, he died in prison, but he died because he was an elderly man in prison, and the conditions in prison where he was held were not good. And I've seen interviews with his family, his close family, who they don't like the talk about, you know, he was targeted because of the pharmaceutical companies. And I don't think that, you know, I don't know how Nip's family feels about those theories, but I think that it's likely that, you know, there's more to it than what we know. And, you know, so Dr. Sebi becomes kind of a distraction in a way to me, but, you know, his therapies definitely were something that Nip, you know, used himself and praised in his music. And, you know, I think the narrative captured his imagination for sure.
So we have another book question, but then we have two really interesting questions about youth and using a book in classrooms and things like that. So let me get to this one other question real quick, and then we'll work on those other two. So Kevin asks, does Black Sam play any part within the book as far as the little known details about Nip?
Does he play a part as far as what?
The little known details?
Oh, the little known details. Yeah, I mean, yeah, well, as I mentioned, I did have a chance to speak with Sam. I have also searched for all of the other interviews that he's ever given or statements that he's made. I mean, he is a man of few words. I think both he and his brother prefer demonstration over conversation. And so, you know, there's a lot more to the story than I know, but I've shared everything that I do know. And yeah, I was privileged to have a conversation with Sam very early in the research process. And, you know, I look forward to him sharing more of his story one day, perhaps, you know, but like I said, he's a man of few words.
So let me get to these two questions from Royce and Vera. And I think one of them, Regina, you could probably speak to as well. So Royce asks, do you believe this book can help young people who struggle with failure and not having the opportunity to achieve their goals, as well as knowing the big picture? And then Vera asks, I am a high school educator. My students have integrated Nipsey as part of their playlists and their quote collages. Would love to know your vision from all the panelists of how you see Nipsey as a part of a curriculum aimed at the center of youth culture.
Mm-hmm.
I love those questions. Those are great questions. The first question, I just hope, when I hear that question, it makes me feel that, you know, something that I was trying to do stuck, you know, because I do think the whole point of talking about Nipsey's legacy is to apply the lessons that he learned through experience, and that everybody can have that much more of a head start, you know. In my conversation with him around Victory Lap, he said, you know, I'm not out here handing out bags of money, but the game is free. I'm giving out game. And as we were young hustlers, that's all we ever expected, you know, was like, you don't have to give us everything, but give us the game, you know. Otherwise, if you don't share the game, when I say game, I'm talking about, you know, the science, the insights, the hacks, whatever you want to call it, the insights of, you know, strategy, navigating through life. If you don't give us the game, it's like you're hating. It's like you're, you know, if you are not slacking in your hustle, you should be fine, even though you gave the game to others that might be slightly competing with you. So, you know, give up the game. And that's what Nipsey did. He was like open source code in the internet world. You know, he shared every single insight, every single lesson that he learned. He put it in his music. He put it in his interviews. Folks on this panel have been saying they first heard about him through his interviews, you know. That interview with Davey D outside the Get Your Money Right Summit is a very famous one. you know, young Nip Hussle talking about, you know, Davey said, like, how come you're not blinging? You're an up and coming rapper. Why do you have crazy gold chains and stuff? And he said, all that stuff is cool, but you know, that's a depreciating asset. I'd rather invest in some real estate.
Mhm.
And Davey's like, what did you just say? Can you say that again? You know, and I'm going to be speaking with Davey later this week. I'm looking forward to asking him about that on Thursday. But yeah, Nip was just nothing but nonstop game for everybody's benefit. He wanted to share with anybody that would pay attention. Like Tamiko said, he gave very detailed information, more than he was asked to give. And he did it at all times. He was just a tireless. And, you know, Lauren told the story of how he would fall asleep with earbuds and listening to podcasts. So to the educator that's wondering about, you know, how to integrate him into the teaching curriculum, look up his reading list. I mentioned a lot of the books that he was reading in this book, The Marathon Don't Stop. You know, he was constantly absorbing information and then analyzing it, processing it, and putting it out in the most useful way he could. And it is my hope that, you know, I mean, there are now book clubs organized in Nipsey's name, which is very fitting. And I hope that The Marathon Don't Stop is worthy for inclusion on a reading list like that, you know, it would be a book that Nip would have found useful, or, you know, people of like mind will find useful in the future. So yeah, Nipsey is an educator, among other things. Although he did not complete high school, he was self-educated, and he was constantly educating everyone around him at all times.
So I think there's one more question too, before we wrap up, and they mentioned it in our sort of like discussion about the importance of homegrown hip hop collectives.
Yes, Dr. Bradley.
Yes.
Talk about it.
Oh. But no, I feel like Atlanta is particularly unique to this conversation because, you know, when we think about Atlanta collectives, we automatically go to like the Dungeon Family, more recently like Spillage Village, you know what I'm saying? But I think what's important for folks to understand, and this goes back to the earlier part of our conversations, we were talking about like connecting the dots, so to speak, is that Atlanta has been a music city. Like I'm thinking in particular about the funk. Atlanta is a funk capital. And the only reason I knew it was a funk capital is because my daddy was a huge funk fan. And every time he would listen, he was listening to Brick, SOS Band, Cameo, Gap, all of these folks. And it wasn't until I learned how to connect the dots, I was like, oh, okay. So I feel like the Dungeon Family is a really interesting collective. So whenever anybody talks about being in the dungeon or being in the basement, that's where my mind automatically goes, right? Like that need to build upon each other's creativity, hustle, grind, whatever you need to do is all part of that conversation. And I always kind of find it fascinating. I'm not the one to write about this, but hopefully somebody out there will write about this, is the connection between Atlanta and West Coast artists. Because you know, we talked about Tupac. I was like, Tupac's an honorary down south Georgia boy. As much as that man was down here, we're gonna claim him as our cousin. But clearly, Nip is another part of that. I'm also thinking like, E40 and Too Short also, you know, had that connection here. But I think that idea of the collective is what makes West Coast and Southern rap kind of come together, because they're always kind of like in conversation, right? So part of a collective also means the ability to collaborate. And I think that collaborative effort is something that definitely worked in Nip's favor, but also what works in the favor of a lot of our favorite OG pioneer Southern rappers who tried to instill that into younger generations of artists so that we're continuously, you know, seeing that. So I feel like he's in a longer continuation of what that means, and introduces the possibility that, you know, hip hop's not just the music. Like I think that's the thing that most stands out about, you know, whether it's the Slaughter Boys or however you think about Nipsey's contributions. It's like, yeah, we do the rap thing, but let me also put you on to these other things. We're thinking about using hip hop as a lens to do so. You know what I'm saying? So actually reintroducing that possibility of hip hop as culture, not necessarily this collapsed idea that hip hop only means rap, which is what we need to get away from quickly. You know, you know what I'm saying? So I think, and just to go real quick back to Vera's question, when I use Nipsey, I think about one, the way that he got his message out there. So letting students talk about podcasts, letting them use the different means of how they're thinking about critical engagement, right? And it's not necessarily just an academic thing when we call it critical engagement, because we've been having these conversations, you know, since cafeteria table about music and culture and life. But allowing students to, you know, what I tell my own students, I'm like, claim your brilliance. You know, if there's a reason that Nipsey stands out to you, ask them why. Why do you like this quote? Where are you getting this from? Point them in the direction of, if that's who you're looking up to, or maybe kind of follow and emulate some of these other things like entrepreneurship, like reading, like listening to, you know, the podcast. So I think ultimately, when we think about a collective identity within hip hop, Nipsey stands out because he took advantage of those from multiple angles, right? In the same way that, you know, a Dungeon family took advantage of being on the outside. Hence, you have an outcast, right? Being able to change the game from the outside looking in. And now that a lot of folks like, oh, it's just the blueprint. Like, I think the big thing that stands out is, it was kind of like what you were talking about earlier, Rob, is like these artists that we recognize as these bright lights, right? The Outcasts, the Nipseys, and something usually tragic has happened for us to give them that genius accolade, right? And I'm wondering, or I'm hoping that this particular book puts the genius back onto Nipsey from his life, not necessarily his death, which is usually the lens that we use when we think about Tupac's, Biggie's. It's not necessarily that they were geniuses when they were here. It's like a nostalgic genius almost, like I'm looking back on this genius. So I think what we can do in terms of using the Marathon Don't Stop as curriculum is looking at how Nipsey continuously saw himself in the future. How did he see him bringing his people into the future? And how did he expect to get there and not losing sight of like the capitalistic part of it? Like, I think that's the thing, is like, he never lost sight of the money. Like, I remember when somebody was like, he always measures it in terms of money, but money didn't dictate how he presented community. It was just a tool to create an advanced community. So having those type of conversations with folk and not having these collapsed, outdated, you know, ideas about this is what hip hop's supposed to do, not supposed to do. And I think that's what Nipsey should be remembered for, is that he was continuously pushing the idea of the culture and the industry in hip hop moving forward.
No question about it. And I think there's a quote that you just reminded me of in the book where Dr. Melina Abdullah, who's one of the co-founders of the LA chapter of Black Lives Matter, was also, you know, a scholar. And she mentioned that, you know, after his passing, you know, this idea of like controlling the narrative, right? So people have kind of some people have presented Nip as this like super capitalist, you know, who was just like stacking chips and driving expensive automobiles and stuff. But, you know, when she would speak with him, he was very much about the concept of like collective success and like community shared success and uplifting everybody. And, you know, that's within reason. But, you know, I think that spirit of one of the things that made Atlanta's hip hop scene so powerful is that there was this cooperative spirit. People talk about it, that everybody would collab with everybody pretty much. There was a couple people that didn't get along, but for the most part, everybody would jump on a record with everybody. You know, 808 Mafia is producing half the city. And, you know, there's just like a lot of collaboration, and they all go to the same strip clubs to break records. And so it's like, you're gonna have this outsider mentality outside of New York. You know, you remember the source words of famous words when Outkast said the South got something to say, you know, and sure enough, they ended up, you know, becoming the center of hip hop, you know, and remain one of the most important creative centers. And LA had a similar feeling that New York, you know, I mean, I asked Snoop about that exact conversation, because you know, the same source awards that Outkast said that was the same source awards where Snoop was up there saying, "Oh, so New York got no love for Snoop Dogg."
Yeah.
You know,
we know where we at.
yeah. That was like, all of those tensions were, you know, that was growing pains for hip hop as an industry, you know, and So I saw Snoop in New York and asked him about that, years later. And he spoke frankly about it. And some of what he said is in the book, that New York had it for a long time and held on to it tight and was not really trying to let it go. And, we understood the quality level had to be up there. And we understood that, the stage presentation had to be up there. And we studied and we loved that music. And, I think people outside New York tended to be more open-minded in their listening habits, I mean, when Nip, the reason I asked Tamiko that question, like who cared about Nip's press run at that point, is like, even when he did the New York radio run on Victory Lap, he was sitting down with some of the gatekeepers of radio. I'm not going to call names, but you can kind of figure it out, like what the big stations are. And they were not that familiar with his music, man. It was obvious. It was kind of embarrassing to me, like watching him, them asking these like basic questions that, obviously if you claim to care about hip hop and, your station is like nationally recognized platform for the culture, you should know these records. You should be a little bit more familiar, and you should not be saying, well, this is the first one of your records I've ever had a chance to sit with. This man is 12 records deep at this point. And, it's unfortunate. So I think even though there was 2 sold out shows in New York City on the Victory Lap tour, that album didn't get the kind of support on radio it should have. There was a lot of bangers on there that weren't getting played in New York. I don't know about other cities, but I live in New York. And, I mean, I worked at Vibe during the 90s, so I understand about, the tensions that can result between cities and all that stuff. But I think Nip was the most open-minded person, but he wanted his local scene to grow. And he was invested in making that happen and supported all rappers. You would never hear Nip diss a rapper. You could, some of these shows you go on, like these funny shows, like Viacom has, these like sort of game show format things. They get rappers on there and try to get them to say funny jokes and diss rapper. Like, which rapper would you never collab with? And he would not diss Vanilla Ice. He would not diss any rapper. He loves hip hop too much, and there was no, like even Tekashi 6ix9ine, he kind of, it offended him, some of the antics, but he held back from really flaming him like he could have, because I think he just had a lot of love. I mean, he wanted to be crisscross when he was a little boy. He wanted to be a child rapper from an early age. So he loved this music, and, he respected anybody that could feed their family, uplift their friends, and build with this art form. And, that's probably a good place to leave it. Hip hop is awesome.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. Of course, I want to thank Rob and Regina and Tamiko and Christina for joining us this evening. Don't forget, the order links are there. You can pick up a copy of The Marathon Don't Stop. Rob is sending signed book plates to A Cappella Books, and they will put those in there for you. Also, we have an order link for Chronicling Stankonia, and you can pre-order Outcast Reader as well, supporting local authors. Don't forget, check out Tamiko's This Is Hope, and go ahead and listen to the Inside the Gold Club podcast that Christina did and won the award for. You'll get your fill of all sorts of Atlanta hip hop culture in one way or another. Oh, wait, is Tamiko bringing, we're going to have a visual aid?
No, I had to get my book.
I
have my book.
Got left out from the book waving crowd.
No. And I just wanted to point out too, when we were talking about education, the one thing I really like about this book is that I think it'll teach young people too about respecting the process, because we live in such a, social media centered era where we think things are just instantaneous. And I think this book will help people understand that success is not overnight.
How so? Please expound on that, Tamiko. I'd be curious what you mean by that.
Well, I mean, I think through this book, it basically, shows this process, from A to Z. and how, you know, he went through the raids. You talk about that in the book when he was supposed to do, I forgot, I think Made in America Festival.
Yes.
And he got detained, and but he kept going, you know what I mean? He had all these setbacks. I mean, way many more setbacks prior to that incident, but just the fact that, like you said, people, you know, see the cars and, you know, his jewelry that he had later in life, but it did not, you know, start that way at all. And he went through a lot, endured a lot. And I think, again, that this book will show that process. And I think that's the educational takeaway for me, that it's truly a marathon.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention, I mean, we were talking about all these sorts of events that were happening, from the election of Donald Trump is brought up in the book because of FDT, but also in light of the recent shootings that were happening here in Atlanta. I think people need to remind themselves to take the long view when it comes to the culture as well. So this book is a really good reminder of that. I think as far as it being an education exercise, I mean, kids could get a journalistic exercise out of this as well, like to understand that somebody's story is more than just sound bites. All this cultural context and historical context that we talked about today, that contributes to a person's story as well, not to mention all these family and these personal histories. So yeah, I don't know, you got me inspired, Tamiko. That was a really, really great point. Thank you.
Of course.
Excellent. Well, once again, thank you all for joining this evening. Thank you all to watching from home and allowing us to come into your houses this evening, sit on your couch, and share a great story and a little bit of history with you this evening. Thank you once again, Rob, Christina, Regina, Tamiko. We will see you all again very, very soon. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye.
Thank y'all. Have a good night.